Welcome to Go-to-Market Science. In this podcast, we share tangible, actionable playbooks from the trenches, working as go-to-market strategy and RevOps consultants for our clients here at Union Square Consulting, and candid conversations with revenue leaders in the market that have been there. Now let's get into it. All right, welcome to another episode of Go-to-Market Science. We've got a great CRO story today on how QuotaPath grew ARR per rep by 3x using AI and other things that they did to create efficiencies. Our special guest today is Ryan Milligan, CRO at QuotaPath. Thanks for joining me today.
Eddie, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
I am super excited to dive into this. So we're going to talk about how QuotaPath tripled ARR per rep by leveraging AI and improving efficiencies in each step of the go-to-market process, about your thoughts on how AI is not replacing salespeople, but making them more effective, which is a common debate on the web today. How you guys increased ASP by, and keep me honest, about 40% in the same segments. Tell me if that's wrong.
No, that's right.
And then how you guys doubled win rate in mid-market, and probably some other things too, as well as some of the AI tools that you guys use to achieve this.
Sounds great. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Cool. So without further ado, before we dive in, I'd love it if you could share your background a little bit. You're a CRO now. You were leading RevOps before that. You were doing some other cool stuff before that. I'd love for the audience just to get an idea of like what your background is that may have helped you figure out how to execute on some of these things.
Amazing. Yeah. So I'm Ryan, CRO here at QuotaPath. I've been at QuotaPath for about 4.5 years now. Started my career in data science at Wayfair.com, big SQL junkie and liked analyzing and pulling data and telling data stories, but then wanted to get more into the executional, operational side of the business. So went to display advertising and like a marketing, performance marketing side of the house. And then after business school, went to work at a company called Homebase, also doing performance marketing, and then shifted into more of the RevOps side of the world. And then at my time at QuotaPath, I've been here for 4.5 years now. I initially started by leading RevOps. But we sell primarily to RevOps leaders. And so we had a sales leader leave to go do more consulting work. And I raised my hand about 3 years ago and said, I should be a good fit to run the sales team. The team's done quite well. We've been 100% blended quota attainments 8 of the past 10 quarters. So it's been encouraging thus far. And then over time, I've taken over leadership of our marketing and account management teams as well.
That's awesome. It's such a robust background from analytics to marketing to RevOps to now CRO. And we could do a whole episode, and I've done these in the past, as we discussed, on how folks go from RevOps to CRO. But I thought it was an even more interesting story on how you actually impacted ARR growth. And I think what's most interesting to me about that is it's very tangible. I feel like right now LinkedIn is just flooded with these stories about how somebody, implemented cloud code and they booked 87 meetings last week, or they booked 200 leads. And you're like, yeah, did you actually book any revenue? And you're running a sizable go-to-market team. You're not some solopreneur posting on LinkedIn about the latest, cloud code hack. And what I loved about your post that made me reach out to you and want to invite you on the show was talking about like this tangible outcome of measuring ARR and the belief that AI is not necessarily replacing sales reps, but making them more effective. I'd love if you could expand on that a little bit before we kind of dive into the details of what you've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the prevalent notions is that a rep spends 25 to 30% of her time selling. And our notion was, how do we double that and spend more time on the phone? And so the way in which we approach the problem has been at every step in the funnel in which a rep is spending a lot of human hours doing something that's not uniquely human, like updating CRM, sending multithreading emails, updating next steps, building business cases. There's a long list of these things, building QBRs on behalf of customer relationships. How can we leverage AI to solve very discrete problems on behalf of the seller? And how do we get the seller bought into the power of AI at solving these problems? And so the way in which we did it, we partnered with a couple different tools on the CRM side, using Momentum to automatically update next steps and a lot of other fields required to sell our product. With our product, there's a lot of questions to ask. So I should have started. QuotaPath automates the process of calculating and paying commissions. And so we have to understand the mechanics of your compensation plan as well as the mechanics of your data setup in order to make you a successful customer. So we have to ask a lot of questions, and reps have to fill out, 75, 100 fields on a deal before moving it to closed one, right? So AI is a great tool to use to automatically update those fields, build prompts, and be able to capture that data. And then throughout the course of the sales cycle, there's other things that reps want to do. And my question to the reps was, hey, how could you close 30, 40, 50% more deals a quarter? And they said, hey, these are the things that I'm doing that are taking a lot of time. Building proof of concepts for customers. I'm building custom business cases. I'm building pricing proposals. I'm demonstrating ROI. And so we went step by step for each of those problems and said, how can we use AI to deliver that output for them that the human can uniquely use? So we use a tool called Dust, which basically creates these micro agents that solve very specific problems, pulling in from CRM and from Gong. And then the reps can interact with that both on a manual nature and an automated nature to generate the things they need in order to, provide value to customers and move them through the funnel. What we say with our sales process is it's a high speed, quick to value, easy to adopt sales process for a RevOps leader. That speed to outcome is very important for us and for our buyer. And so AI made our reps a lot faster.
Wow. That's awesome. You jump ahead a little bit because I wanted to dive into that in a minute, but that's okay. Before I do that, I want to paint some context for folks because we've done a number of interviews like this with CRO stories. And I think it's so relevant to understand what's the sales team look like, who are you selling to, et cetera, so that we can paint a picture for the audience and they can compare if their sales motion mimics yours or if it's different and put that in context. And so I'll start by just asking, can you describe who you sell to and the rough size of deals without giving us your exact average price point and what segments you target?
Sure. So this has evolved over the years since I've led the team, but I would say who we typically sell to today is a director or VP of revenue operations. One of the main things that's great is they have their data structured in a CRM, like a Salesforce or HubSpot or some way that's ingestible for us. We're typically selling SMB through the upper mid-market. So orgs with anywhere from 5 to a couple thousand sales reps, that whole gamut. And so there's a range of outcomes, but deals can be anywhere from $6K to a couple $100K is the range. But really, a lot of our velocity is on those orgs with 50, 100 reps who want to use their comp plan to drive the right behavior and the right performance from their go-to-market teams.
Got it. And what's the size and structure of your sales team today?
Yeah, so I lead the broader revenue work. So on the sales side, we have a team of 7 today on new business. So we have a sales manager, and then with that, 7 individual reps. Some report to me and some report to the sales manager. We then have 2 BDRs doing a lot of work, also like AI-powered outbound work as well, which we can talk more about. And then we have customer success managers. And so they are responsible for implementation, account managers who take over the relationship, like both in implementation and post, and then solutions engineers who help from the technical side. But from a go-to-market perspective, my orbit is marketing, so demand generation and BDRs and GTM engineering, RevOps, sales engineering, and then account management as well.
So you got a fair bit going on. So I wanted to ask you, I asked you this on the prep call, do you think, you already answered this, but I'll let you answer it for the audience. Do you think it's easier to implement AI for more transactional, high velocity sales?
I tend to think so. I think the thing that I really like is that you get an immediate feedback loop. So, we're a rep on my team is working anywhere from 30 to 50 open opportunities at a time. And so getting feedback on business cases that have been AI generated or, how the deals are moving through funnel. There's a high volume, which gives a lot of feedback, and you're trying to really drive a fast sales cycle on behalf of the buyer, right? So we operate in a pretty competitive space. There's a number of tools that automate the process of calculating paying commissions. And one of the things that I pride ourselves on is that I think we are the best buying experience. We have pricing on our website that none of our competitors have. We have a free trial. You can get started playing around in QuotaPath today. We don't require a BDR qualification call, like a number in the space too. You can book with an AE today, right? So I'm very focused on the speed of providing value to a customer or a potential customer. And so that is really great from an AI application perspective because I get a lot of data very quickly and then I can pivot effectively based on that data that I get. The AI applications in more enterprise sales to me are different. They're things like, how do I build maps of large complex organizations? How do I think about parent-child relationships? There are incredible AI applications there. I just find them to be different than the relatively higher velocity transactions that we have today.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that's a slightly different answer than what I thought you gave me on our prep call. Whereas I thought you were saying maybe a little bit more that you thought it might be harder in more transactional sales. But the hypothesis here is like, if you think about like the penultimate AI SDR that just like sends out a bunch of outreach and books a bunch of meetings, one can imagine how, whether that's, inbound or outbound, one can imagine how that would be much easier to replace, a 22-year-old seller fresh out of college with zero experience that's selling a $5,000 solution, instead of your enterprise sales rep that's been in the same industry for 30 years and has all these relationships and is trying to get a meeting to pitch a $10 million solution. And even I'm not sure that I believe that. I've sold everything from, I sold cell phones in college for like $30 a month to I worked in private equity where we sold multi-billion-dollar private equity funds, $25, $50 million checks at a time. And, when I was doing that, the pushback from the folks I worked with on even the concept of doing anything like what we do in B2B SaaS was, well, this is all relationship driven. Like nobody's writing a $50 million check because you've like templated some email or hired some 22-year SDR to cold call them. Although to be fair, I was 27 at the time and I was cold calling people managing billions of dollars and I was getting meetings. And so I don't know like how far that goes, but the way that I thought about that, because I was also doubling in ops, was, well, okay, we might only close 5 deals this year, but how many meetings do we have to get to close those deals? And how many emails do we need to send? And how many people do we need to cover? And even though we're only covering 3,000 people, at some point in that journey, you hit this level of volume where you need some type of system and automation. And this was a long time before AI, but now AI, where you talk about mapping a complex organization, that's a tremendous amount of work where, that might not mean that AI is going to go and send the email to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but wouldn't it be beneficial to have all of that background information before you actually finish that email and press send?
Oh, absolutely. And I think what I was trying to emphasize was that the applications of AI are very different in the different models. I think for what I'm focused on with my team, it's all around speed and how do I competitively present value markedly faster than my competitors. So when people are evaluating tools in the market, a lot of them will say, QuotaPath is the first proof of concept that I'm doing. I'm looking at a couple different tools, but you all are the first one that's built for me. And that's by design. I want to be able to get your comp plan, use AI to analyze it, use AI to build the plan, interpret it effectively, and then be able to show you that very quickly. And because momentum is the major driver of these deals, and time kills all, these conversations. And so it's how do I use AI as a tool to make my team more efficient with an output of speed and volume, and that's really been the fundamental focus.
Yeah, so let's dive into momentum. I'm going to kind of skip ahead here because I had some other questions before we got to AI, but I'll just jump into it because I know this is what people want to listen to. So for anybody that's not familiar, what does momentum do? I think you kind of answered that already. And specifically, what exactly was the problem that it helped you solve? I think you kind of answered that already, but if you could just recap it and go a little bit deeper for the audience.
Totally. It's funny. I was talking about the concept of momentum, the noun versus momentum, the tool, which I realized I conflated the two. Momentum, the tool, and a lot of these tools that we use are really focused on building a set of prompts trained off of our data that intake call data and email information, and then take those prompts and take that information to address questions. So those are things like filling out next steps automatically after a call, updating the probability of a deal, filling out what are the descriptions of the compensation plan, what are the variables they're going to need to use, what is the source of data that the customer is going to have, filling out these variables that we will need to have to then prepare a customer for successful implementation. And so it's just momentum is working in the background to update all of those variables on our behalf. And so as we have tried to make sure that we have really continued strong gross and net revenue retention with our customer base, that all starts in implementation. And so we have to prepare our customers effectively for what they should expect and what our CSM team should expect. And so getting that information effectively prepares us to be able to have those conversations, and we can go more into depth to prepare for the implementation side of the house.
I love that. And it's so interesting because pre-AI, this was many years ago, and it's not the only time that I've seen this, but we had an absolute train wreck of an engagement where we were working with a customer, specifically with the finance department. And at the request of finance, and specifically the CFO, they wanted these 35 fields filled out on Salesforce every single time a rep got off the phone. We pushed back and said, this is not a good idea. But of course, they made the final decision. So we did that. And finally, the CEO stepped in at some point because the reps were absolutely rebelling. And then he fired us with some really, nasty language, fired the controller, fired the CFO. Basically, everybody involved got fired because the reps were like, what person built this? And you think pre-AI, and this is something I feel so strongly about, you have to be so choosy in what you ask reps to do, because everything you ask them for takes them away from that valuable selling time. But what you're saying is that you are now able to capture those 35 data points that are really critical to managing your sales process and or your onboarding process, which I want to dive into, because you've got AI doing all that work and the rep can still focus their energies on doing what they do best, which is selling and talking to customers.
Exactly. Like if a rep doesn't have to be thinking about taking the notes on what CRM are they using, what ERP are we joining to, do they have cliffs or draws or other mechanics of their plan, if they're just asking those questions and the customer's describing it, but they're not having to spend that much time thinking about it, the rep can spend more time thinking about creating value for the customer. And then you would have a situation in which a call would end and the rep would be furiously inputting those fields into CRM, where instead I would rather have the rep thinking through what's my multi-threading strategy, how do I send our new product for them to play around with, how do I create actual value versus being a note taker. And so that's been crucial for our ability to give our reps the opportunity to close more deals per quarter.
Now let me ask, just out of curiosity, why is this important? Why do you need those 35 fields? It's great that you've got AI creating this efficiency so that reps can spend more time selling, but another way to slice this is just don't ask them to ask that information. Why is that so critical that you had to find a solution to it?
Yeah, so context is massive in the handoff process of our customer relationships, right? So if you think about the ways in which someone potentially becomes a QuotaPath customer, they could talk to 3-4 people in their first year of a journey working here, and not being able to hand off that context gets the customer quite frustrated, right? Because they feel like they have to re-explain themselves from time and time again. And then it makes it really challenging for the person getting that customer to give them value very quickly, right? We want people to be able to build their compensation plans and pay their team very rapidly in the product once they're signed. And if a CSM gets on the phone post-sales and has to repeat all the same questions about comp plan design and the mechanics and the triggers, that's taking away from time to give the customer value and actually use the product, right? If you think about a journey of a customer, maybe it's that we host an event, a prospective customer talks to myself or a BDR or someone at that event. We gather some information that we capture. Then we open a sales process with them. We do a first demo. Then we do a proof of concept. On the proof of concept, we'll pull a sales engineer. Okay, well, now I got to get the sales engineer up to speed on this. Then we're closing the deal and we're moving into a customer success manager who's taking over the implementation. And then after the implementation, an account manager is taking over, right? So you're talking about a lot of different people who are involved in the process. And if you don't give them the information they need, you don't set them up for success to deliver value to the customer in a short period of time.
Quick pause. Everything we talk about on this show, diagnosing go-to-market ops, prioritizing projects for revenue impact, processes, metrics, insights, building a predictable go-to-market engine, we've built frameworks for all of it. They're free and ungated on our website, unionsquareconsulting.com/frameworks. The link will also be in the show notes, so make sure you check that out. All right, back to the episode.
Yeah, it's something that resonates with me so much because when I was at Salesforce, I think they did a pretty good job of not asking us for a lot. There were only 3 or 4 fields we had to keep updated on the pipeline because they wanted us selling, but that was management. When you come to the SE, it's an entirely different story, right? So at least for us, I had at some points in time, one SE that was covering 4 or 5 teams, not just 4 AEs, 4 teams of AEs. So you can imagine how discerning they were with their time. And it's not uncommon that SEs are, a very rare resource. And so they would push back and say, well, if you haven't gone into Salesforce and updated all of these different fields, I'm not even going to join your meeting because I'm not going to spend an hour listening to you regurgitate your entire deal. I need you to document this so that I can prepare quickly, right? And so this took an immense amount of time, but it was necessary, especially these were more of the bigger strategic deals where we'd pull SEs in, and they needed all of that color to do a good job of doing discovery and then setting up a demo or proof of concept or what have you that we needed to win that deal.
And I mean, I think for us, we sell every customer relationship is unique at QuotaPath, right? Every customer has a unique compensation plan. They have unique compensation plan logic, and then they also have unique data sources and ways they architect their data sources. One customer joins Salesforce and NetSuite. The other customer joins HubSpot and QuickBooks. Like they're all using bespoke data structures. And even within those data structures, no HubSpot is the same among the hundreds of customers who are using HubSpot. So they all have different names of fields and different naming conventions and different structures. So there are a number of tools that you can sell where the sales process is pretty much the same. It's a widget, right? You sell the widget, it clicks in, it automatically does everything you need it to. You don't need that context. For a tool of ours where you're joining both unique bespoke compensation plan logic and unique bespoke data architecture, you have to have that context or you're not setting anybody up for success.
I think that that's a really important point, right? So there are some sales processes that are just very straightforward and you're kind of selling the same concept. And there's others, our business is not, different than yours in that respect, where there's so much information and data and nuance that you need to collect. And if you don't have any help with AI doing that, then you're just stuck sitting there looking at notes and looking at call transcripts and spending hours and hours connecting the dots.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here? Let's talk about Dust. What does Dust do? And actually, wait, hold on. Before I move off of momentum,
sure.
One other question is, did you see it? So I understand how having all this data in Salesforce from momentum really sets you up for success on customer success, on onboarding. And maybe you've already answered this, but did the use of momentum actually help you guys improve your win rate on actual deals?
Yeah, so it really helped. It was less a win rate driver and more a volume of deals being able to work driver. So it was just it basically allowed us to stretch the limit on a per person basis of how many deals they would consider actively working at a time. So that went up about 10-15% once we rolled out the tool. And, you have that liminal touch point with a rep where she says, okay, I have 20 open deals. This 21st one comes through. In a pre-AI automated world, the barrier to keeping that deal going is much higher because they carry the mental burden of logging all those notes. But if every deal, everything is automatically logged for you, you want to handle and navigate, 30, 35, 40 deals at a time. So I guess that does come into, it's less win rate on a per deal basis, but it's volume of ARR closed per rep per quarter as a function of them being able to carry more deals to fruition because AI is automating a lot of the note taking.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And then also, by extension, I don't know if this applies to you, but for other people, when you save time on the pipeline management piece, then you have more time to spend prospecting or multi-threading or what have you. And I know for me, in every job I've ever had in sales, I've always had this point where I open up Salesforce or whatever CRM I was using, and you look at your opportunities and say it's 15, and you're like, I'm now at my limit. I know this is going to take me X amount of time to go through each deal, figure out what's going on. And it's not just admin. It's admin's one thing, you appease management, but the other thing is just, I need to know a certain amount of information before I can pick up the phone or send an email to follow up. And without any help, it just takes X amount of time. So streamlining that now saves time that now that I can go prospect, fill the funnel with more pipeline, and then I don't hit that point where I can't sell more as quickly in terms of the number of deals. So it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's what is the mental load on a per deal basis and how many can I carry at the same time? And we felt like we had a good opportunity to improve that further. And that's what has proved out for us.
So are there any big ahas or takeaways for the audience? If somebody's thinking about implementing momentum, for example, I don't want to make this a plug for momentum, even though ironically I have a call with them in an hour or two. But not getting paid for this, I promise. But if somebody is listening to the show and they want to go implement momentum, are there any key learnings that you've taken away that are necessary to make it successful?
Yeah, tools like this are only as good as the prompts, right? I think that's the biggest one. So you have to have a very, very good understanding of what fills out a field. So we have a field that's current comp plan description. And if you don't, it took us a while to get that field in really good shape, because if you don't add the mechanics of what you're looking for, you can pull in a lot of extraneous information and you run into the AI slop problem where you're just dumping, bullets and bullets and bullets of not useful information. And so these tools are only as good as the prompts in which you set them up with. And it is important to know exactly what you're going to do with each of these fields, because the more fields you're able to update, you also have a bit of a burden of why am I keeping these fields? Because all of a sudden, if you're saying, okay, AI can update 75 or 100 fields, you should then put the mental pressure on, okay, do we actually need 75 or 100? Can these three combine? Because yes, you've used AI to update 100 fields. Now I'm a CSM and I got to go read through 100 fields worth of notes, right? So it almost opens your ability to do so much, then you then have to be more exclusive and explicit with what you actually need to be updated to be successful.
Yeah, and I think that's just sort of like a 101 RevOps thing where there's always this temptation in ops to go build the next thing. And you got to ask, like, how exactly are we going to use that thing to generate and close deals, right? Because if there's not a tangible use case, then it becomes noise.
Exactly. And I've been guilty of that myself, right? And putting my RevOps hat on, there's, some fields that I've built in the past that I look back on now. It's like, why did we possibly need that? And I think your access to that data, like data for data's sake, is not valuable. And so that's where I advise people to push back on themselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But with that, I think like it's not just the prompts, and I don't know if this applies to how you guys use momentum, but it's also, first, I think it's the process. And then I think it's also the adoption of that process. So there's elements that you can't automate with AI. There's things that like are, yes, okay, we've got call recordings, so maybe reps don't necessarily need to write down what they're discussing on the phone. You've got emails, but then, there's always, at least for me, there's always something that slips through the cracks. Like I was, texting somebody that I'm working an active deal with right now, and I'm like, shoot, this text, no matter how much AI I have, is not getting its way into the CRM. So like, is there anything that you faced with your implementation of momentum where you said like, I've got to get this process in place, the human process. I've got to get my team executing this before that is going to be effective, before the AI is going to be effective?
Yeah. I mean, I think, how do we take these fields and put them in like structured output in a handoff note perspective for the next person in line? That was super important. Like, what are the fields you bucket in certain sections, and how do you lay that out for a way that if a CSM steps in, they're not just reading this like long laundry list of things? And that's also kind of the reason why we paired a tool like Momentum with a tool like Dust, which is how do you create these like really shareable briefs internally that take all this great data that you've captured and structure them using AI in a really like digestible way to solve problems. And so that's another piece of this is we spend a lot of time creating the perfect handoff note in CRM. And then we realized, okay, but that handoff note might need to flex based on the mechanics of the deal and like how difficult the implementation is going to be, or how complex the data structure is. And we want that structure to be able to change. And so that's why we've brought AI as well into like the handoff process from point to point. So it can be flexible based on the different needs of a different customer at a certain time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what I'm hearing is that you ultimately spend a lot of time trying to perfect that handoff process. Like what specific information needs to go from sales to CS in what format, and then you can use the AI to figure out how do you deliver that.
Exactly. And this data is only as good as it gets applied by the people who need to use it. And so we had a couple false starts on this process where in the kind of initial AI slop days of this, where we thought this beautiful handoff note, but it was just like 5 pages long and completely unreadable. And that was prompt tuning, right? But you realize that if you get that wrong, you're handing something off to a CSM who doesn't feel compelled to read it. And then both sides are frustrated, right? The CSM is going back to the AE asking questions, because they don't have the answer they need. And the AE is frustrated because they feel like they've gathered all the relevant information, and that's not valuable, right? And so how do you make sure that everyone's read into the process and feels like they're moving along in the journey effectively with you?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Before we move on, anything else you want to say about momentum for somebody listening to this and they're thinking like, I want to implement this. How do I avoid failing at it? How do I make it a success?
I mean, I think you have to have a really clear understanding of what you want documented before you start with any of these tools or opportunities. Is walk yourself through what the perfect set of handoffs is, what is the exact data you need, and pressure test it, and then go to the people who are ingesting it and say, if you got this laid out in this way, would you be happy? Yes or no? Would you have what you need? And that I find is really helpful before you even go to any of these tools, because then you know what your target output is. You want to have your target output in mind before you inject AI into the process, because if you don't, you'll end up with an output that's not serviceable by anybody and leads to a lot of frustration.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And then I would even make the argument, and feel free to disagree with me if you
Sure.
just don't agree, that you've got to get this fundamental process, this human process down, like the shit that doesn't scale, so to speak, before you go to the AI. So what I'm hearing from you is that you did this with humans first. You got the process in place. You said, okay, this is what a good sales handoff looks like. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't it wasn't a total mess. And then you say, okay, now we've got something working with humans. How do we get AI to do that? And then once you do that, then you still have to iterate to get the AI to do the thing the way that you need it to be done.
Yeah, exactly. And we had sales engineers that were spending way too much time in the pre-AI like nature of this, but it did work, right? So we just filled that with more human hours initially, and then eventually we said, okay, how do we inject AI to make these team members more efficient? And then sales engineers could work more deals on a per person basis, and so could the reps. And so yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. And the reason I'm like diving into this is I think that there's so much FOMO right now with AI, and every single CRO and every RevOps leader feels like we need to implement 15 new AI tools. And there's this, it feels like, running around with a hammer looking for nails. And you're trying to implement these AI tools without thinking like, what's the thing that is actually working to drive revenue that we could then apply AI on top of? But like we go with the AI SDR, and maybe we don't have SDRs to begin with, or we don't have an SDR like team that's actually functioning properly. And so now we're taking wild guesses at what might work when we could just try it with humans and get it working, and then apply AI to replicate that workflow that has actually shown to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's you've reframed the question. I feel like throughout 2024 and a lot of 2025, the question was, what problems can I solve with AI? Or it was like how do I inject AI into this process? Which is not a helpful statement. To me, the question is, what things are taking my team too much time to do on a day-to-day basis, and can AI solve those for them or make those faster? Like, it's not, to your point, it's not leading with, okay, I'm going to inject AI into this process for the inject AI into the process sake. It's let's get a discrete set of problems that my team are spending too much time on that are not creating value for anyone involved. And how can we use AI to solve those problems? And that has been very beneficial to me. And I think what a lot of people forget is at the end of the day, you still need the human to be bought in. And so if you just inject AI into a process and make it clunkier, you really risk alienating some really strong sellers on your team. So doing a lot of interviewing early on to say, where are you running into snags in the process? Walk me through yesterday. How did you spend every hour of the day? And if they said, I spent 2 hours building a proof of concept for a potential customer, that is a red alarm to me to say, okay, how do I use a tool that we have to ingest that comp plan and build it for you, so that you could spend those 2 hours doing something that you can uniquely do to create value for them.
Yeah, I love that. And I would even almost posit a different lens on this, where I would say, or I would ask, rather than like, where are reps spending time? You're essentially making the assumption that the number one thing that you need to solve for in the business is saving reps time. And then I would even ask, why is that? Well, because I want each rep to produce more. Why is that? And ultimately what we're trying to do is, I mean, in some ways, it just comes down to finance, like dollars in, dollars out. Like, I got X amount of dollars to put into go-to-market. How can I maximize the output in terms of revenue and profit that I produce with that? And then that comes down to, well, I've got X budget for headcount. And so one really effective way of leveraging that budget better is to make each rep more effective. But if we, at the end of the day, like, would you buy a company that has no AI if they're just crushing it financially? Like, okay, we have 100 sellers and they're super inefficient, but somehow, some way, we take $1 and turn it into $5 every single year. Okay, well, every investor on the planet wants to buy into that company. Sure. Most of those companies don't exist right now unless they're like an AI native startup right now. But that's ultimately the lens that I want to look through. And then you drill down and you say, okay, well, how can we sell more? And then I would say, well, okay, I could do everything you're describing by just hiring a bunch of VAs in the Philippines. Okay, well, why would that be better or worse than AI? And I think there's really strong arguments for why everything you've described makes perfect sense to do. But I'm just trying to present a different lens where, well, if and I do have VAs, not in the Philippines, but in Latin America, where, yeah, there's probably a way that I could use AI to do that, but it's something they're spending 5 hours a week on, which costs me, not a lot of money. And so is that really the problem that I need to solve for right now?
Yeah. And I think I like the way that you think about it. It's like, I need to make these reps more efficient because I need to like positively improve my cost of sales. And it's an interesting point where my like ethos and all this stuff is I'd like to run the smallest team possible. Like I like small teams. I like small, efficient, high performing teams. The more people you add and inject into a process, the more extraneous risk you have, right? Every new person has a range of outcomes that you can't necessarily model or control. And so I really like small, efficient, high performing teams that win, that hit quota sustainably, and that have high momentum. And that is the thing that I think about is like you get a business into a rhythm. It's how do you then maximize the ARR per FTE, right? Like one of the things that I think a lot about with this business is how can we grow revenue markedly faster than we grow headcount? And I feel like back in the day, the sign of running an incredibly successful revenue team was running a big revenue team. It was, I have an 100-person sales team. I have a 50-person customer success team. And that was like the badge of honor. And today I feel like it's the inverse. Like you want the smallest team you can possibly have to hit incredibly high targets, because then they win, everyone wins together. You build this sense of morale and momentum that really wins long term.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there, and I love that. And in some ways, I'd look at that and I'd say, okay, I completely agree with you, because everything you mentioned, it's so difficult and expensive to hire people, to manage people. You have a limited success rate on an individual basis, et cetera, et cetera. So the smaller the team that you have, especially if that team becomes small because you're just, keeping the best players, then to me, that makes a lot of sense in terms of just driving a profitable, high growth business. On the other hand, like, I have like mixed feelings about the whole ARR per rep or per FTE. I mean, you look at like a company like Goldman Sachs. I remember many years ago, they were pumping out like $1 million per FTE. And I'm like, okay, well, sure. But, half of these people are making, 300, 400, 500K. And like Goldman Sachs is a very valuable enterprise, but, since 2008, I haven't heard anybody talking about them as like the darling of like, Wall Street in the sense of an investment opportunity. All anybody wants to talk about are these hot tech startups. So like, cool, Goldman's got this extremely high revenue per employee, but if I can have 1/10 of that because I've hired a bunch of folks at 50 grand a year that just crank out revenue, okay, well, I'm winning, right?
Sure.
So anyway, I'm not sure what point I'm trying to make. I'm just kind of, going down a rabbit hole here.
It's a good point. I mean, I think you have to blend both ARR per FTE with like overall margin and cost profile of the business, right? And like burn and profitability. I think that there's a lot of metrics that run into it. I like ARR per FTE as one because it says when you model forward, how many people do we need to get to this level of ARR? And I just think that's a fun exercise to say, how could we double that? And I think that, and if the answer to your point is just pay them 2 times as much money, okay, well, that's not the answer, right? I do like to invest in my team and like to give them raises as a function of their performance and like raise OTEs pretty consistently. But you have to raise ARR growth, obviously, much more dramatically than you're raising OTEs, or you're just conflating or like, inflating a problem.
Absolutely. Well, let's get back into it because I know we're short on time. Tell me about Dust. So first, what do they do? And what was the problem that you guys were trying to solve with Dust?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So Momentum solves the problem of, hey, let's gather all this information and write it to these fields in CRM. Dust solves the problem of, I have a discrete set of tasks that I want to do that are taking me a long period of time that I feel like AI can automate. So those are things like, I would like to write a multi-thread email to every CFO, CRO, and CEO evaluating QuotaPath, of companies evaluating QuotaPath, to add particularly our unique value from the sales process. Okay, that's going to take a rep a long time to do, but we built a Dust agent that goes and looks at the LinkedIns, the profiles of the organizations, then pulls a lot of like contextual references from the Gong conversations, then pulls similar customers from CRM and writes a bunch of these emails, right? And so what I like about Dust is it combines a number of the MCPs, CRM MCPs, Gong MCP, like all the like relevant data that you're going to need, and then is able to be trained to solve like very discrete tasks. And reps can operate it both in Dust as the tool, but they can also operate it out of Slack. So they can call, within deal rooms that we have at Dust, can you go build like an executive brief for this call? And so there's just a number of ways in which we wanted to present information for different people, for different contexts that we wanted to do at scale that we just didn't have enough hours in the day to do. So, if you think about our account management function, we want to be able to generate a QBR every quarter for every customer. okay, we have over 1,000 customers at this point, right? So they're kind of mechanically impossible to use humans to generate a QBR for every customer every quarter. But if you have an agent that pulls in their usage data, pulls in the context of recent calls, pulls in new product releases, and generates a QBR that sits and is able to be sent, okay, that presents a lot more value. So you're basically taking all of the relevant like contextual data, you're using these prompts and asking for these certain outputs, which typically are PDFs, URLs, PowerPoint slides, what have you, that solve the right problem for the right person at the right time. And that's how it's been impactful for our business.
That's incredible. So I'd love to double click on the multi-thread email generation. So first question is just how do you get the data? So one, obviously LinkedIn is notorious for being really protective of their data. So how does Dust even get access to the data on LinkedIn?
Yeah. So the way that we do it is I'm trying to think of the right way to approach it. So basically, we don't do any like automated stuff directly on LinkedIn. So we'll actually like hit the website and look at the like about us page and some of the founders, and then it'll gather the information that the rep will then go find the email addresses usually, because we don't want to automate that. We don't want to automate on LinkedIn because it's like very penalizing. So it's usually looking at like the company page or prompting the rep based on like press releases and other things. This is who we think this person is. So go look them up and like pull their relevant information. It's finding the person who it is actually not a very taxing problem. Like finding the name of the person and their email address. You can go into LinkedIn and gather that information. It's more writing the contextual email to that persona based on the call information, based on our similar customers and that sort of stuff. That was actually the most taxing part of the process. But yeah,
I thought you were saying like you'd go in and like read like the post that I read of yours that prompted me to reach out to you, and you're basically automating the process of taking that post and turning that into a relevant email.
No, it's more mid-sales cycle stuff. So after a first demo or during a validation process, I want to make sure that the CEO, the CFO, and the CRO and the VP of RevOps are all like aware of the evaluation. They're aware of our unique value props. They understand why working with QuotaPath is like a great fit for their organization, because you do find that especially in modern SaaS sales, you have a CEO or CFO lingering in the background, ready to say no to a purchase that the whole team's excited about. And a lot of times that's because they weren't aware that the evaluation was happening in the first place. A RevOps manager is go taking a look at QuotaPath. They're building up this business case. They go present it. The CFO says, no, we have no budget for any tools right now. And then you've done a lot of work for no output. How do I go to the CFO earlier in the evaluation and say, hey, this is how we could partner together. This is some information that could be relevant, what have you.
So how'd you go from concept to actually sending the email? Part of that I want to ask, like, are reps reviewing these emails before they actually press send, or is this fully automated? And how did you get from the concept to, okay, we now have reps pressing send on many emails that we're very comfortable with?
Yeah. So a lot of the multi-threading actually goes through me. And so that's like one part of the process. So I run stand-ups with our team. We run a stand-up every day. And each day we talk through a different problem. So, on Wednesdays, we'll talk through what are the opportunities you need to be validated by our sales engineers? What are the statuses and what are the priorities, for example? On Thursdays, we talk through multi-threading. And so the reps come prepared for me with a set of emails that our CEO, others in the organization can send to peers that the reps have written. They've reviewed, they've used Dust to write, and they've reviewed. And they come to me and say, hey, I want you to I want Ryan to reach out to the CFO at Jones Software. This is the email that we've written. It talks about some similar customers we work with. It talks about, unique value props. This is the email. I've reviewed it. Ryan, here's the email address of the person. Here's the context for the deal. And here's the email you should send. And so we have human intervention points like baked into the process, but it's allowing us to be able to, at a much higher volume, bring in senior stakeholders into our deal process, which has been massively impactful, because you can get ahead of that CFO who said, oh no, we have no budget for this. I'd rather know that on day 3 of the evaluation than day 73, right?
Mm-hmm. What have you guys done, or how have you handled hallucinations? I mean, I think anytime you're pulling this very large set of data, there's always this fear that it hallucinates and gets the data wrong. And then how long would it take you to go through all that mountain of data to validate it? I'm curious how you tackle that problem.
Yeah, so the hallucinations has not been a huge problem for us. What it's trained off of, or what it's reading, is gong calls, it's reading like industry relative information. So we haven't had a huge hallucination problem. Also, the risk of hallucination in an email is not like my primary concern. You can quickly just like make sure that the customers that they're referencing are similar, like in a similar industry to the customer you're talking about. But even if you were to miss on that, that's not like the most devastating miss to me. So there are some things like this multi-threading where I'm willing to take a little bit more of a hallucination risk, but we haven't seen that as too much of a problem.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Awesome. Well, we only have a few more minutes left, but I dove into one specific use case. What are some of the other most impactful use cases you found with Dust?
Sure. So if you run through the entire sales process, basically from start to finish, we have specific agents that solve each of these kind of problems. So you run a first demo. How do I send a like ROI and business case? So pulling in like ROI calculation tools that we built, and then pulling in their relative information to like present a business case. So how do you auto generate those? How do you then think about the multi-threading process, which we talked about? How do I then build like a go live plan for a buyer based on the information that we've had? What is going to be the mutual action plan for go live? How do you build that in a really interesting way? How do I then build handoff notes for multiple people in the organization? So can I automatically build a brief for a sales engineer to prepare her for a call? Can I build a brief for an exec who's going to hop on a closing call to give me like exec level important information that I would need? Do we have mutual investors? Do we have like mutual relationships? Some of that stuff that's like kind of publicly available. From there, through the process, you can do a sales engineer to solutions engineer handoff, or a rep to a CSM handoff. And then through the account management process, you can do things like account briefs, QBRs, pulling in usage data. So basically every step of the process, you can have these certain problems and that we're solving discretely with these agents that are, you have a kind of primary agents, an account management agent, a go-to-market agent, and then sub agents that are built to solve some of these specific problems.
That's awesome. All right. Well, we've only got a couple minutes left now, and I want to cap this off. Let me go back to the original pitch here for this podcast, which was the results that you were producing. So tripling ARR per rep, increasing ASP by 40%, doubling the win rate in mid-market. Of all the things that we discussed or anything we didn't discuss, if you had to pick, what are a few of the things that you felt were most impactful in helping you achieve those efficiency gains?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the auto updating CRM field stuff gave reps a lot more time to be able to close like a higher volume of deals. That played a very large role in this process. That'd probably be the primary. And then the secondary is a lot of the business case and ROI generation, both pre and post sale. So being able to have a very clear ROI narrative that's trained off of the customer's data, that takes what they say and apply it to how they're going to be able to buy. It allowed us to create a lot of buy-in on deals that could have said, oh, I can't make the case for this right now. Now's not the right time. You can build around the cost of inaction, and talking through the cost of inaction to a buyer and that FOMO of not buying has been very impactful for us and been a great value proposition in the medium term.
That's awesome. Well, we got deep into the weeds on this, and like some of the answers you gave, like I was genuinely curious myself on how you navigated these, common challenges. So thanks for sharing this.
Of course.
If people want to reach out to you, how can people find you or find more about you or your content, your company, et cetera?
Absolutely. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, posting a couple times a week. So definitely check me out there. And then we're going to be, kind of a sneak peek. We're launching a new product in about a month or two that I'm excited to get people's hands on, which will be, I'll be posting a lot about it soon, all around compensation plan design and like go-to-market efficiency. So more to come there, but I'm very excited for people to check it out.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me today.
Cool. Thanks, Eddie. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If this resonated, please give us a 5-star rating and a follow. It helps us reach more people, and you get our latest and greatest content without having to search for it. And if you're looking for hands-on help in go-to-market strategy and/or RevOps, please reach out to us. We help our clients with everything from annual planning to improving processes in go-to-market, implementing systems to support those processes, and go-to-market AI. We're always happy to offer a free consultation to help you identify the best opportunities to improve your go-to-market engine with or without our help. You can find us at unionsquareconsulting.com, and the info will be in our show notes.